Go ahead and get started. So, what we're going to talk about today is basic credit information. We're going to talk about scoring. Where does it come from, and how you can improve your score. I'm also going to touch on the different scoring models and how many different scoring models are in use right now in different industries. We're going to talk about hard versus soft inquiries, and then we're going to talk about changes coming. So first of all credit data comes from three national repositories. They're Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. What's interesting about them is that they're competitors. They do not share information with each other. So you may have some creditors, well, most creditors do report to all three bureaus, but you may still find creditors that only report to TransUnion or only report to Equifax. And in those cases, that may be why your particular score with that one particular bureau may be higher or lower, depending on whether it's good credit or bad credit that's being reported. They also have different data points, and they report at different times of the month. So let's just say that, if you're Capital One may very well send in all their data to all three of them. But Equifax, they may update it right away. TransUnion may batch it over the weekend, and Experian may not batch it until next week. So even though your creditors are sending all the information in on time, they can still update at different points in time, which is why when you're watching your own credit report, sometimes you see, wow, why did my score adjust on one bureau and not the others? That's the main reason why. So let me come in here to this one. Scoring defined. So years ago, when scoring first came out, they tried to determine, the data scientists sat down and they said, you know what? We want to try to predict whether or not an applicant will have a 90-day late payment at any point in the next 24 months. That's what we're trying to predict. And how it does that is it uses a scorecard. Just like when you're in school and you get a grade for the year, there's all different components to that grade. The same is true with the score. And that's really what it's trying to predict, whether your applicant's going to have a 90-day late at any point in the next 2 years. And the corresponding score is that, that range that we're all familiar with, the 350 to 850. So, in the credit world, when you're dealing with lenders, mortgage companies, car loans, credit cards, you know, there's a very specific set of rules that all creditors have to follow, all credit reporting agencies have to follow. We're all governed by the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And what that is a federal law that gives parameters and guidelines on what creditors can and cannot do. And basically, to summarize it, if you have good credit and you have a strong payment history, that can stay on your credit report indefinitely. And that's a good thing. It's going to help boost up your credit score. But if something's derogatory, that's where the federal Fair Credit Reporting Act kicks in, and that's where the guardrails come in. And they say, okay, if you're going to put something negative on a consumer's credit file, here are the rules. And the rules are basically, if it's derogatory, it can only stay on the consumer's file for 7 years. The only exception to that is a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which that can stay on for 10 years. So why that's important to know is that if you have, let's just say 6.5 years ago, somebody had a major event where there was a lot of issues going on, but they've since rebuilt their credit. Well, we know that, hey, in 6 months, once all this derogatory information falls off, your credit score is gonna jump way up. So very important to know that. Also, if you as a consumer see something on your credit report that's derogatory, that's 8 years old, then you know that's wrong. That needs to come off immediately. And later on, I'll give you the mechanisms on how to do things like that. So let's talk about what's not in a credit score. All those items that are listed have no bearing whatsoever on your actual credit score. The last one, the interest rate, sometimes people get a little confused with that and they say, oh, wait a minute, shouldn't I have a higher credit score if I have a 0% interest rate as opposed to a 12% interest rate? And the answer is no. Interest rates are not factored at all into the credit score. So one thing we want to talk about is when I talk about credit score, it's that's a generic term that can mean a lot of different things. So if you're a consumer, you may go on, if you have a Capital One, for example, and they will give you your Vantage score each month. If you go to a mortgage lender, they're going to pull mortgage scores. If you go to the car dealership, they're going to pull their version. So there's many, many different versions of scores out there. Just like your computer software or your phone operating system, there's a lot of different things in play right now. And it's important to know that because, when you get into consumer scores, they typically tend to be higher than when you go to buy a mortgage, buy a house with a mortgage. The mortgage industry has the strictest credit scores because Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the government agencies require that to be a very specific score that quite honestly is outdated and looks at a lot of older data that's years and years old. So that's why you'll see these big differences. And that's why, sometimes you may see your consumer score and you say, oh, I'm doing okay. I have a 750, but then the mortgage lender pulls it and it's 690. That's the reason why that happens. The mortgage lender's doing everything they should be doing. They just have to use a different scoring model that's dictated by Fannie and Freddie. So that really causes confusion with a lot of borrowers. So that's why what you want to make sure you do is if you're getting ready to buy a house, you want to make sure that you get to a good mortgage originator like Tidewater Home Funding and say, hey, we want to buy a house. We need to see our mortgage credit scores. We want to see what an underwriter is going to see and what we can really expect as far as buying a house. Same is true if you want to get a car. Definitely you need to make sure that you're getting the right scoring model so you know what you're supposed to deal with. Now, this is my always my favorite slide, and this is basically the odds chart. And just like if you go to bet on the Super Bowl or you go to Vegas to bet on a sports team or something, this is very, very similar in that the investors sit down and they say, you know what? We have a pool of money, and we want to lend this money out, and we're comfortable with certain levels of homes that may come back to us or certain numbers of repossessions. And what this says is we know that if through millions and millions of data points, we know that if we have an 800 credit score, we have to do 1,292 mortgages before one of them is going to have a problem. Conversely, if we have below 620, 1 out of 8 of those is going to come back on us. So what they do is they draw those lines, and they do it in all industries, car loans, mortgages, and they say, you know what, we're comfortable with 720. So if you're 720 or higher, we'll give you this interest rate, we'll give you this program. And a lot of times, it is, first of all, you have to qualify by getting the right credit score. And then even once you qualify, you may still get a better rate the higher your credit score goes. So it's all driven by these types of charts. And why that's so important is suppose, you're getting ready to go buy a house and the mortgage company needs you to be at 680 and you're coming at 679. Well, you're 1 point away. So theoretically, either 1 point can either cost you the house or not, or 1 point maybe in, yeah, sure, we'll give you the loan, but you may have to pay an extra 3% or 2% or whatever. So that's why it's very, very important to see where you're at. The lenders know where the cutoffs are. And then the next couple slides we're going to go through is how to make sure you can get over those humps if you need to, and make sure that you're putting your best foot forward to get the best credit score possible. So the scoring models, they're proprietary. They don't go out and actively say, hey, this is the exact formula that we use, but they give some general guidelines. And in our competitors, we've all gotten together and we've been able to reverse engineer enough to know with about 98% accuracy which actions are going to translate to an increase or a decrease in credit score. And also keep in mind that when they generate the credit score, the instant your credit report is pulled, they're going to the bureaus, grabbing the data, and then running it through the scoring engine. So what that means is if there's something derogatory that shouldn't be there, you're going to get penalized. So that's why it's very, very important to look for inaccuracies. Make sure you know what your credit report has on it. If there's something inaccurate, then I'll tell you at the end of the slide how to go and get those issues taken care of. But here's the meat and potatoes of everything. This is the grid of what the grading system is, if you will. And 35% is your past payment history, 30% are your balances, 15% is your credit history, and then 10% each for your types of credit and use and your inquiries. And we'll go through each one of these to give you some insight. So this one here, payment history. This basically means if you pay your bills on time, you're going to do great in this category. But if you don't, if you miss a payment, for illustration purposes, let's say you have a Capital One credit card and you have your first late payment. But what's going to happen is that first late payment is going to hit you the hardest for the first 6 months. And then what happens is it's kind of like a fire. The further you get away from that fire, the less heat you're going to feel. So it's going to start to heal itself. So after 6 months, the decrease is not going to be as much. So just for argument's sake, let's just say you had a 800 credit score. And let's say you had your first late payment, so you drop 100 points. Now you have a 700. And again, I'm just making up numbers to illustrate it. Well, after 6 months, instead of losing 100 points, you may only lose 80. So it's still going to count against you, but not quite as much. And it's going to then have another trigger at 24 months. And that's a pretty significant one where once something ages outside of 2 years, then it really starts to diminish. So in my example where you got hit, 100 points for the first 6 months, then you got hit 80 points for the next 7 to 23 months. Well, at 24 months, you may only take about a 15 or 20 point penalty. So again, that's important to know because if you had an event, you know, almost 2 years ago and you're like 1 month away from the 2 year anniversary, then the mortgage lender can go in there and say, you know what happens to this credit report if we age it 1 month? And they can say, oh, this person goes from a 610 to a 720, and then they have all these different loan programs that open up for them, or car loans, or whatever the case may be. So that's why it's important to kind of know these are the rough parameters of how long something's going to penalize you. Once something's 2 years old, it'll still count against you, diminished, all the way until it falls off at 7 years. So that's the payment history piece of it. The next piece are your balances. And what this is, typically with mortgages, car loans, student loans, those are designed to where you take them out and you pay the monthly payment over time, and there's no problem with that. Where this 30% of the balances comes into play is when you have revolving credit cards. And what the revolving charge cards do is they say, hey, you may have a credit limit of, this is $1,000. And then as you start to put money on that credit card, your score is going to go down. And there's different percentages, like at 30%, you're going to take a hit, at 50%, 70, and then when you're maxed out, you're going to take the biggest hit of all. And why that's important to know is that the easiest way for consumers to increase their credit score is to pay down their credit cards to either zero or keep a very, very small balance on it, maybe $10 or $15. So that's the ideal way that you can get to the highest credit score possible. So again, that's an easy way to get points, and it only applies though to revolving charge cards. You don't need to go pay down your car loan or your mortgage. You're not going to really get a big bang for your buck doing that. This is only designed for the credit cards to do that. Something new that's being introduced in the industry is what's called trended credit data. And what that does is that looks at your last 24 months of history, and it reports to the lenders, hey, this is what David's minimum payment was on his credit card. Here's the payment that he actually made, and here was his balance. So they can actually look back through the last 24 months. And why that's important is that moving forward, the lower you can keep your credit card balances, the better you're going to look to the lender. Because before they used trended credit data, you could come in just a month before you wanted to buy something, pay everything down, and then you get this huge boost in credit score. Although you can still do that, over time, that's going to start to diminish once newer scoring models come out, probably in next year or the year after that. So I just wanted to mention as a best practice to start trying to keep those credit cards. If you can't, and I understand not everybody can pay them all down to zero. So if you can't get them down to zero, go through them all and get them all under 70% of the use. And once you do that, get them all under 50%, and then get them all under 30%, and then pay them down that way. So you're much better off doing that and having them all under the certain percentages than trying to just do one and then leave a huge balance on another one. The next piece here is the credit history. So this is simply how long you've had your accounts. And in the credit world, what happens is when a new trade line shows up, it starts at zero and then starts counting each month that you've had it. And it counts all the way up to 99 months. And what happens is the model's designed that, okay, if you have a brand new credit card that's only 1 or 2 months old, you're going to take a hit for that because it's an unseasoned account and the model doesn't know whether or not you're going to be able to handle that account. So the trick to that is you want to make sure that you don't have too many brand new cards at the same time. So somebody may have had a card that they got years ago, and it may be sitting at 99 months, and it's really helping their credit score because it's a long established account. Let's just say they get mad at that creditor because they're doing a fee or something weird happens with the credit card and they close it. Well, now you no longer have that long established account and it's going to go to the next one. And let's just say your next one's only, 10 months old or 6 months old, you're going to see a decrease in your credit score. So you got to be really careful about closing older accounts. And then when you do get a new card, the worst thing you can do is not use it because then that counter may just stay at 1 or 2 and it always looks like you have a brand new card. So that's why you want to be using your credit cards at least once a month. And it can be something, it can be just a couple bucks, buy, just a couple dollars here at the store. Just buy something, pay it off. Buy something, pay it off every once a month, and then that'll keep that counter going. And then you'll actually be using your credit. So very, very important for that to happen. And again, I mentioned that typically a new account will take 6 months to season. Also, another question that comes up kind of in this credit history segment is always, well, wait a minute, when am I actually late? And it's a very important to understand, again, the Fair Credit Reporting Act puts rules in place as to when a creditor can actually call you late. So let's just say my credit card is due on March 1st. Okay, so it's due on Saturday, and I don't pay it. So sometime next week, the credit card company may come and say, hey, David, you were late. We're going to hit you with a $35 late fee and, all this other stuff that they're going to send in this note to me. Well, at that point, I could say, oh my gosh, I've already been late. Maybe I'll just deal with this next month because I've already been late. Well, it's true that I've been late with the creditor internally with them. However, they cannot legally report that I've been 30 days late until it's truly been 30 days from my due date. So in this example, it was March 1st. I didn't pay it. So really, they can't mark me late until April 1st. So why that's important to know is that at any point in March, I can go and make my minimum payment and then I save my credit. They cannot mark me late. And again, they can internally charge me a late fee and they can send me nasty grams, but they cannot do it to the bureaus until it's really been a true 30 days. So and that's so important for consumers because I see, sometimes when times get tough at the end of the year or something's going on, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm already late on 2 cards. Maybe I'll just deal with this next month. They really should be saying, no, no, no. We got to do everything we can to get those minimum payments made before that 30 days so that we don't get hit with the bureaus and have a 30-day late payment on our credit report to destroy our credit score. So very, very important to kind of understand how that works. The next piece here is the types of credit in use. And this is basically the one real red flag here are finance companies. So again, mortgages are as many mortgages as you want is fine. Car loans are fine. Student loans are fine. And then the credit cards, as long as you're managing them properly, they're fine. But what you want to stay away from are the finance companies. And how you know you're dealing with a finance company is when you apply for that line of credit, you can only use it at that particular store. So it's very common with home electronics, maybe furniture, stuff like that. So you want to make sure that if you do get something, it's like a Visa or MasterCard, that you can use it at many, many stores. And even if you have like a Home Depot card, that's actually a MasterCard or a Visa, so you can still use that at any other merchant. That's really what you want to make sure you look for. Because the models do not like finance companies. Okay, the next piece here are inquiries. And this is how many creditors are coming and looking at your credit report. And I just want to clarify at the beginning, I said there's a difference between a soft pull and a hard pull. And so inquiries only count if they're considered a hard pull. And what the difference is that when someone wants your credit report, when they pull either a hard or a soft, all the data is the same. They still see the credit score, everything's the same. But what's different is the permissible purpose that person has. So for example, when you go in as a consumer and get a copy of your credit report, that's a soft pull, doesn't count as an inquiry. If your current creditors go in and periodically check on you every quarter, that's a soft inquiry, does not impact your credit score. So the hard pull, that's where you're going to actually have an inquiry and that can hurt your credit score. And how you know that's happening is that's when you actually apply for credit. You're actually making a credit application with a mortgage lender, car loan, or a credit card. and asking them, hey, pull my credit. I want an extension of credit. So when that happens, there is a penalty involved with quote shopping around. And what happened was years ago, there was a very famous case where somebody went car shopping and they started off at the Honda dealership in the morning and had a good credit score. And they went to the Chevrolet and then Hyundai and Ford. And by the end of the night, they finally bought a Nissan and their score had dropped 80 points. And they're like, wait a minute, this isn't fair. So what happened was there were safeguards that were put in place to say, okay, we can't penalize the consumer for shopping around. So we're going to give them a window of time where they can have their credit report pulled as a hard inquiry as many times as they want. It'll stop counting after the first one. And that range is anywhere from 14 days to 45 days, depending on what you're applying for. Like in the mortgage space, it's 30 days. Some of the consumer models and car loans, it's 45. But typically what you want to look at is, okay, you know, if we're trying to buy a car or we're trying to buy a house, let's try to do all the shopping in a very, very compressed period of time. And you know, if you do that, then you'll be okay. The worst thing you can do is go and pull your credit report today, and then 46 days from now pull it again, and then another 2 months later pull it again, because then you're going to start getting hit for all these inquiries. So, um, and I did misspeak on the 30. What's happened was the mortgage industry is between 30 and 45 days. Um, so we're just going to basically err on the side of caution and say 30 days. That way you know that you're covered. Because again, it goes into different models and different bureaus and different, versions of the FICO score, even at each individual bureau. Okay, so the tips to improve an applicant score. What you want to do is you want to pay down
Okay.
revolving cards all below 30%. You do not want to have anybody close an account unless you know it's safe to do that. And the best way to know that is, especially if you're getting ready to buy a house at any point in the next year, then the best advice I can give is to say, sit down with a mortgage lender, have them pull your credit report, see where you're at right now, and then say, okay, here's what we need to do to get your credit score where you need to be. And if you're already where you need to be, then great. You just keep doing what you're doing. But if there's a room for improvement, then you may say, hey, you know what? What will your credit report look like if we open a new charge card and in 6 months from now, what's your credit score going to be? Or what if we close this? And they can model that out and see what'll happen with each individual activity. And maybe you say, you know what? I just bought a brand new car last week and it hasn't shown up yet on my credit report. They can model that out and say, here's what it's going to look like with a brand new car loan at $20,000 for $300 a month, or whatever the case may be. They can input that information and predict what will happen to your credit score. And then that way you have a blueprint and you can kind of plan ahead and say, yep, I'll be ready to buy a house maybe in June or next September. And here's what I need to do in the meantime. So very, very important to try to get the process going as soon as possible. If you have a big purchase, mortgage, car, anything like that, it's very important to do that. And again, you don't want to consolidate all your debt onto one or two cards. You want to try to keep it, keep it all spread out and make sure that they all go down. Ideally as low as possible, but at least below those percentages that I had mentioned. Also, you want to review all your accounts for accuracy. So again, if you're going to go to a mortgage lender because you want to buy a house in the next year or two, then they're going to help do that for you and you can go through that process. But let's just say you're not going to buy a house or you're not going to buy a car or you just did it all and you just say, hey, this is the best practice. What should I be doing? And the best practice that you can do is to go in periodically to annualcreditreport.com. That's a free service mandated by the federal government that each consumer can get a copy of their credit report. Before COVID, it was once a year. Now it's unlimited. You can just go in and get the credit report. Um, they won't give you the score, but you can actually get all your raw data so you can see and make sure that it all looks good. And you should definitely be going in every 6 months to a year and doing that on all three bureaus to make sure everything looks okay. If it doesn't look okay, then there are definitely mechanisms that you can put in place. When you get that annual credit report, there's a really cool reference number that they give you. You can use that to go and dispute things, work with the bureaus to get things cleaned up or corrected if they're erroneous. The next thing we want to make sure you do is bring past due accounts current, but you also got to be careful when you do that. And if you remember from my earlier slide, I said that, hey, for the first 6 months, you get hit the hardest. And then at 2 years, it starts to diminish. Well, sometimes, a lot of times people get excited when they want to buy something and they say, you know what? Gosh, I remember 4 years ago, I had this issue with Verizon or with the cable company. Maybe I should go and start paying that down now. What you have to remember is that that account, even though it's derogatory, was aging out. So it may have been 4 years old and it may not be counting that much against you. But if you go in today and call them up and make out a payment arrangement or stir up that account, then that's going to change the data loss activity. Instead of being, maybe in 2021, now it's going to look like a brand new one in 2025. So when you're trying to bring past due accounts current, you want to make sure that you're getting good advice. And again, if you sit down with a mortgage lender, they're going to tell you, hey, this is how your score is going to impact by paying this off. And maybe we don't do it right now. Maybe we wait and have it done at closing when we're buying the house or the day before closing, so we don't hurt the credit score, but yet we still pay off the debt for the underwriter. So again, it's all about managing these types of situations. And you really want to make sure you have somebody that has access to modeling the credit report and has access to good information so that you can help, get through those types of situations. Um, and again, you also want to avoid any creditor initiated inquiries. And that's where if you're calling up to get a credit line increase or something like that, you want to be cognizant of the fact that that's going to be a hard pull. And if if you had your credit report pulled 2.5 months ago and now you're going to come in and try to do it again, that could adversely affect your score. So you want to try to manage those the best way you can. I also want to talk about changes to medical collections. So in 2022, there was a new rule that came that said that, okay, medical debt is no longer going to be included on a credit report as long as it's paid. So it has to be paid medical debt. So it can be any amount in the world, but once it's paid, it's no longer on the credit report. So that was a really, really important update we had. So now the next piece to that, part two of that was in 2023, they said, okay, not only if something's paid, does it no longer count against your credit score, but now if it's at least $500 or more, then we'll count it. But if it's under 500, we're not going to count it anymore. So that's another very important piece. And then there's now part three to that is there's current legislation that basically says we're going to remove all medical collections, and period, no matter what. And what's happened is that is now in the courts. The courts did an injunction. It's going to be back and forth for a little while, but probably later on this year, they'll get all that ironed out and medical collections will come off the credit report altogether. Doesn't matter whether they're paid, not paid, doesn't matter the amount. And that's going to be a really good things for consumers because, it's so, and this is my opinion, it's just so unfair that somebody has a $30 copay at a doctor's office, and maybe they thought their old insurance or their spouse was covering it, and it just got mixed up and it wasn't paid. So now a $30 copay at some doctor's office gets passed around through collections, and your credit score drops 100 points. And it just doesn't make it's just so unfair to consumers for that. And the data backs up what I'm saying because when they run those foreclosures and all the problems, it's never a $30 payment predicts someone that's going to foreclose on a house. It's always other types of things. So we think that's a great thing, and we're really hoping that the courts get all that ironed out and that all medical collections just period come off and are no longer able to count against the credit score for a borrower. So again, more on that as we get through the year, but but so far, at least what they've done is a step in the right direction. So if you know somebody that's had medical debt and they're ready to pay it off, make sure they know, pay it off, make sure it's reported to the bureaus that it's paid off, and their credit scores will go up. And that's all I have.